Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
I think one of the most tragic things about this story is at the time when everything was going on, I don't think anyone really realized how bad of a situation it really was for Hisashi Ouchi. Not so much just with the nurses, but also with Hisashi himself, as I don't think he really grasped how bad everything was and just kind of figured it was a small dosage of amount of radiation, and it hadn't really processed that he was in a very, very life-threatening situation. And I think the nurses realized that Hisashi was in a life-threatening situation, but they didn't know to the extent of how bad the life-threatening situation was. There was a moment in time before things really started getting bad, which we're really getting into at this point, where Hisashi would actually look at one of the nurses and ask, "Do you think I'm going to get leukemia? Because I hear that people that are exposed to radiation typically get leukemia." To which the nurse would reply, "You really shouldn't worry about that, because..." And this just kind of goes to show you just how much Hisashi didn't grasp the seriousness of the situation, because leukemia was the least of his worries. And as you'll soon find out, it was about to get really bad. Now, on October 5th, 1999, the elite physician would actually decide, with his immune system being as bad as it was, they wanted to take a really good look at his chromosomes. And they would actually decide to do a bone marrow inspection to just see how the chromosomes were really looking, and just to see how his immune system was really done. Chromosomes are basically the blueprint and mapping of your body, and they are actually what controls the production of cells. Not so much in your red blood cells, but also your white blood cells, and even the cells to produce skin. And right behind me is actually a mapping or a picture of a normal chromosome mapping. Now, right behind me is a picture of what a normal chromosome mapping looks like. And on October 5th, 1999, the physicians would receive results about Hisashi's chromosome mapping, and it was not good. And it's there that the physicians would realize how serious of a situation Hisashi was in. And right behind me is a picture of Hisashi Ouchi's chromosome mapping. And it's there that the physician realized his chromosomes are not being damaged by the radiation. They're being completely obliterated by the radiation. The radiation was so bad that it was destroying his chromosomes from the inside out. His very essence of blueprints of making cells and building cells was being destroyed on a cellular level. So with his mapping and everyone realizing that it was basically being erased, they knew that they had to do something about keeping Hisashi Ouchi safe from other viruses and illnesses. So they would start giving him PCR tests, which is basically a way to kind of check if there's any viruses or infections in the body. And they would give this to Hisashi on a regular level, because if his body cannot produce cells, obviously he can't produce white blood cells. So anything that goes into his body is going to be an immediate unaliving. To give you a better idea of how bad his immune system was, his white blood cell count was around 800 or 900, and his platelet count was around 18,000. And typically a normal human platelet count is anywhere from 120 to 300,000. It's at this point that the doctors and physicians realize that the best course of action would be to do a bone marrow transplant, or basically to take the stem cells from the bone marrow and transport it into Hisashi. And the reason this course of action was be the best action is it's not really a definite win. It's more of, if this works, this is really good. But if it doesn't work, we're screwed. And what they would do is, in the bone marrow transplant, the stem cells would actually be transported into Hisashi's body in hopes that the chromosomes from these stem cells would adapt to Hisashi's chromosome stem cells. And that way, he can actually start producing cells and actually build up an immune system. The only problem with that is Hisashi, in order to receive this type of transplant, had to have someone who had an exact match of stem cells in their body. And fortunately for Hisashi, he would have an exact match, and that one exact match would actually be from his sister. And his sister had no problem doing whatever it took to make sure her brother survived. So she would tell the doctors that it didn't matter what it was, she would help assist and give him the blood transfusion. I just do not think anyone was aware on how big of an undertaking this would take. But what would happen to Hisashi's sister is they would place her down and they would attach this machine to her body that would extract blood from her body. Then, once that blood had been extracted from her body, this machine would then separate the stem cells from the blood, and then once that blood had been separated from the stem cells, they would return the blood back into her body. So therefore, they could take the stem cells and inject that into Hisashi. But because Hisashi's body was in such a critical condition and they basically had to rebuild his entire system from the ground up, they would actually have to take 120 milliliters of blood and inject it into Hisashi's body. And this entire process would take about 4.5 hours. But even though this transfusion would be a success, they would run into another problem. Aside from having his breathing problems that he would have and be hooked up to a breathing apparatus, remember when I said with radiation that it attacks a lot of the mucous membranes inside the body, so it can't secrete slime or create, different liquids within the body, especially within the intestines, etc. Well, this would be one of those things, because he would start succumbing to these symptoms and become extremely dehydrated because the radiation had attacked his ability to create mucous membranes in his body. So he would actually have to stay hydrated a lot more. This would create a problem because with his skin drying out, his skin would actually start falling off. And remember when I said about the chromosomes and he wouldn't be able to produce cells, you need cells to produce skin. So it's at this point that Hisashi was actually losing skin off his body, and his skin could not grow back because it didn't have the ability to grow back. And the nurses and doctors had to be really careful because not only was his skin falling off because he was dehydrated, if they were to yank off a tape from his body, that skin would actually be ripped off in chunks. It was so bad that even the nurses, when they were cleaning his feet and legs and body, if they scrubbed it just a little bit, his skin would just clump off and he would just be laying in this raw flesh. Thankfully, Hisashi would not have any problems with the skin falling off, as with his low platelets. The doctors were really concerned because if he started bleeding, he wouldn't be able to stop the bleeding because of his low platelet count. And any kind of minor scratch or any of the skin falling off, if he were to bleed, he would completely bleed out. And then the doctors would run into another problem on October 6, 1999.